Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, talking on military channels without your enemy intercepting your comms, we learn about new tactics in secure battlefield networks. Plus, the Coast Guard lives up to its reputation with a series of dramatic rescues. See the footage of some of its latest missions. And a new twist in the Army's effort to modernize its hundreds of thousands of radios. Reporter Colin Demarest is here with an update. Also, the art of OPFOR, an inside look at the unit playing the bad guys to help NATO partner nations train. It's those stories and more in the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. Secure communication is a must when you're engaged in a battle. Your unit definitely does not want your adversary to know everything you're saying on your movement, position, or plans to attack. But in a world of electronic warfare, where intercepted comms are a constant liability, how do you assure that security? We talked to an expert on this topic during a recent webcast hosted by C4ISRNet's Colin Demarest. Have a look.
The Army is doing away with what has for the past couple of years been recognized as capability sets in favor of what's now known as the Division as a Unit of Action Network Design. What exactly is that new metric or scaffolding, and why was that move away from capability sets necessary?
So I think when we first started the capability sets, we were very focused very neatly on the brigade combat teams. At that time, the brigade combat teams were the center of the Army's fight. They were organized and structured to be fully self-sufficient. And our initial step into delivering some of the network capabilities when we made that paradigm shift was very hardware-centric. So the capability sets kind of became a 2-year cycle, and we're largely focused on hardware, tactical radios, some physical boxes they could touch, and then also very centered on that, how the brigade fights. As we shifted the Army shifted to a large-scale combat operations, we saw that the division as a center of the fight brought a different paradigm, a different need. So we had the baseline set. We had the hardware, the technology to physically make things work. Now was the right way to organize and integrate it. So as they shifted the paradigm of how the Army fights in large-scale combat operations to the division, seemed like the right time to make the shift in how we manage the network. Keeping the benefits of the technology we brought out in the Cape set, but shifting the paradigm and how we manage that to support that parallel how the division fights as a unit of action.
And so how will this affect the rate at which networking and comms gear is upgraded, tested, and then ultimately, given to soldiers out there in the field?
So hopefully it accelerates it. And I think what we'll see is some things will still be a little bit cumbersome. Doing hardware, doing highly complex systems usually requires both the budget cycle, the testing cycle to align. But I think we'll start seeing a lot more, especially in the software world. We'll be turning out things in less than a year. A great example of that in concert, our program manager for Mission Command Applications and the Army Interoperability Task Force and the Army Artificial Intelligence Task Force. That was a great thing. Had a great last several months out in the Pacific with the Army's data plan, campaign, and learning, where in that 6 months, since about December till about now, they have made significant turn on capability, data-centric applications, integration of AI in support of the commander. So those kind of things are turning now in months and weeks, as opposed to the months and years of the old days of hardware. So I think we're going to see more capability getting out faster, especially in that world of software-centric design type stuff.
So we have a good question from the audience on this note. Sydney asks, how is PEO C3T working to make command posts smaller, more mobile, and survivable versus adversaries with significant signals intelligence, drones, and the like, as has been reported in the past?
Okay, great question. So we do have a program from the Munition Command Center of Excellence driving us to what's called command post integrated infrastructure. It is a concept that puts the command post into a vehicle and no longer in a tent. 5 years ago, no, 2 years ago, we spent a day setting up a command post, and then we spent a day tearing it down. So the command post was never able to really fight. Now the idea is the commander needs to be maneuvering the command post as well as he's maneuvering his elements. So we're pushing the capabilities that were in the tent into these trucks. The truck allows the commander to be mounted, allows the command post to move, maybe not continuously, but at least at a deliberate pace, so that they can put the command post at a position, execute their decision process, and then move the command post quickly, hopefully within that enemy's targeting cycle. A lot of work being done on controlling emissions. We just talked about that piece, but also looking at the traditional ways you find a command post, noise and light discipline, audio, visual camouflage. Between the ability to move the command post around and the efforts to reduce the ability to detect the command post are two lines of effort really driving at solving that problem of how do we make the command post survivable. Some great work going on within the SOT community in support of a program called Mobile and Survivable Command Post, trying to find the technology aspects to facilitate that and then enable that to be iterative with our soldiers on, hey, how do you fight this? Because most of our commanders have grown up not having to worry about that problem. When you were in a FOB in Iraq and Afghanistan, wasn't a challenge. So a bit of an operational change, but that technology is going in that same direction to facilitate that.
So I was at Fort Myer the other day for a networking tech demonstration, and a lot of the chatter was about this idea of mobility. I think you kind of got to it at your last answer, but maybe we can dig into it. Why is the Army stressing mobility, the need to move and do so quickly so much these days?
Because it gets a near peer adversary who has the ability to detect us, whether it's EW, whether it's a flying asset looking at with EOIR. I think we have seen that when you have a highly skilled enemy, that you can't sit there very long. If you do sit there very long, they're going to find you. If they can find you, they can target you. So really, the drive is if we don't burden the commander with the need to stop, spend time setting up his communication infrastructure just to execute his mission, he can keep moving. Or if he stops, he can only has to stop for a short period of time. And really, the whole intent of that is to be survivable. If the commander sits too long, and there's information, the guys say it's minutes nowadays. If the commander sits for more than a couple of minutes in one place, somebody's going to find him, which makes him a target, and that makes him less survivable. So the drive for mobility is to support that survivability aspect.
And what's the hardest part about this mobility aspect? Is it the literal setup and then digging it back out of the ground and getting going? Is it just the techniques and the process soldiers are used to? Both?
I think there's a couple aspects. One, a lot of the capabilities we provided were just off the shelf infrastructure. And hey, I take a big satellite dish, gets me great bandwidth, but hey, it takes me a couple of minutes to an hour to set it up. That's what we gave them because that's the fight we had a while back. So shifting away from that to more mounted capabilities, a lot of the high throughput, low latency capabilities that come with the low Earth orbit satellite infrastructure and that emerging technology gets the capability to put small things on vehicles so they can move around. But it's also the ability of the commander and giving him the right tools so when he's in a mounted environment and he's moving around, he can operate. And I think of it, how many times have you tried to type on a laptop while driving down the highway? It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to even see the screen. So it's both the communication infrastructure, but also the applications and the tools that we give them to be that maneuver fight. So he's always on the move as much as possible.
I will put it out there that I've never driven while typing on a laptop, just to be clear.
So, yeah. I'm gonna get in trouble for that.
No, you're fine.
Thanks, Colin. And on the theme of secure communications, the Army has seen a twist in its effort to update its hundreds of thousands of radios. Here to talk about the latest is, you guessed it, Colin Demarest. We don't let this guy take a day off. Take it away, Colin.
The U.S. Army earlier this year published a request for information on something known as radio as a service, and feedback from defense industry was a whole lot of mixed signal. I recently attended an industry conference where Army officials talked about what they heard from potential partners in the effort, and heard everything from enthusiasm to frustration, from wanting to manage the whole process to not wanting to be involved at all, according to officials with the Army Program Executive Office for Command, Control, and Communications Tactical, or PEO C3T. The as-a-service approach, if taken up, would be a radical departure from the Army's traditional means of buying and maintaining radios, equipment critical to connecting far-flung soldiers. Typically, the Army would shop around for radios and designs, pick what they like, and buy a ton of them. The new proposed model would be more akin to a subscription offered by some makers of consumer products. Think Netflix, or Adobe, or Microsoft Office. In other words, it could mirror other deals in which companies furnish goods and services on a rolling basis, keep them up to date, and handle glitches and quality control. Army Undersecretary Gabe Camarillo in December suggested the as-a-service method would drive down costs while also affording additional flexibility as world powers like China and Russia try to zero in on US military chatter. But there are also questions about the ability to surge radios when and where they're needed most. And in terms of what's next, radio experts with PEO C3T expect to brief Army leadership in the coming weeks. And I'll keep track of the latest developments as they unfold. For C4ISRNet, I'm Colin Demarest.
Thanks, Colin. Now go get a cocktail or something. When we come back, the Coast Guard dives into what it does best, and a look at an Army unit with a special mission. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. If you're going to train for a fight, you want to do your best to face off with a high-caliber sparring partner, right? Well, in the game of prepping for warfare, the same concept applies. You need a worthy adversary to train against. How does the US get this done in aiding its NATO mission? You gotta have a bad guy. Here's a look at the unit that specializes in OPFOR, or playing the opposition force. Have a look.
My scout platoon from 1-4 Infantry, they have a reputation of a mythical creature that sneaks up at night and takes things off the battlefield or detains personnel. There is a thrill to being the bad guy.
For every NATO exercise, you have two sides, played by NATO allies and partners. You have the good guys, and then you have the opposing force, or OPFOR. They're the bad guys.
I'm here at Hohenfels training area in southern Germany, home of the U.S. Army's 1st Battalion, 4th Infantry Regiment, or 1-4. 1-4 is infamous throughout NATO for providing a bracingly realistic training experience.
These guys are pretty good at what they do.
Join me as I try to get inside the mindset of 1-4 and see what it takes to be the opposing force. Welcome to Hohenfels, home base for 1-4. I'll be joining them for 24 hours to see how they test NATO allies in an exercise scenario. First stop is to get some new threads.
And then this just goes,
Clip it to here.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Then I signed on to a reconnaissance mission with 1-4 Scouts, a platoon notorious for being somewhat creative in their methods. Our mission: sneak up on a NATO airfield and observe its helicopters without being detected by any of the guards.
We're trying to stay concealed so they can make a sketch of the airfield. I mean, it's kind of like a really intense game of hide and go seek. We're sitting here hiding and watching them, and they have no idea we're here.
You got 3 minutes. Finish that one. It doesn't gotta be beautiful. It's gotta make sense.
With the sketch complete, it was time to make a stealthy retreat. But when we heard a convoy of Humvees approaching, we had to dive for cover.
So right now, there are dudes like 10 meters
meters away in that direction. So we're just doing our best impersonation of a botted plan and staying as still as we can.
Then, disaster struck. I was spotted by one of the guards. While the rest of the team had made a clean getaway, I was stuck.
I don't know what to do right now.
Then help came in the form of an American transport plane.
Just make a break for it.
I used the noise to cover my escape. Mission complete. Until I saw the disappointed faces of the scouts.
Huh? Did you stop when they called out? Yeah, but then when the planes came over, we split.
Okay, Roger. Yeah, they heard one of us when we got close. They called out a halt and then we just kept moving. But if you want, I'll send you the pictures and sketches we took.
Yeah, that'd be good.
We learned something. They were alert. They heard us coming. And I don't want to say I compromised the team, but I probably compromised the team.
With a bruised ego, feeling like a liability, I realized I still had a lot to learn about what it takes to play the opposing force.
I have learned exponentially from allies across Europe in this job. We learn a lot about how we communicate, what's more important to our formations. The winning really comes in the readiness built from our NATO alliance here. When you come to train, you will be better prepared and ultimately be able to deter an adversary when you go back to your home station.
So real quick, because we have a really ad hoc team.
Back at headquarters, the scouts are getting ready for a night mission. After a few hours, we found a new target. A U.S. artillery battery that didn't seem well guarded. In true bad guy fashion, they tricked the sleeping guard into thinking we were part of his unit.
Is this Rios? What's up? Is this Rios?
Rios?
Yeah, my bad. Is this Rios? I think I looked at the wrong person.
Yeah, bro, it's Mac.
My bad, sorry.
No, you good?
Do you know where Rios is at?
There is no Specialist Rios. This guard and his artillery have just been captured. These late-night raids are not always appreciated, but rules are rules. Should these troopers be called upon to defend the Alliance in an actual conflict, they won't likely make this mistake again. Being the bad guy isn't easy, but after 24 hours, I understood how crucial they are to improving NATO's forces.
The alliance is strong today. It'll be stronger tomorrow. And that is because they do show up to this rotation to build readiness and be prepared. And the more prepared they are, the more deterrence capability that they have, and the more assurance that we have across our allies. And this is where those relationships are built.
When we return, our financial expert is back with her latest tips on how to hit the best timing for refinancing a mortgage. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives you tips on refinancing your mortgage.
If you've been watching mortgage rates for the past year looking for the right time to refinance, you've seen the rates rise and fall like the tide. With such an unstable rate environment, it's hard to know when to jump in. The National Association of Realtors predicts that mortgage rates will drop this year, with the 30-year fixed rate steadily falling and perhaps going even lower in 2024. That's great news for buyers and owners hoping for lower mortgage payments. If you're looking to refi, the prevailing rate has to drop lower than your current mortgage rate. But the final decision rests upon whether you'll be paying less in interest over the life of your new home loan. You also have to factor in your closing costs and what the home is worth. Perhaps the time is right to take the plunge and refi, or it may take some time before rates get low enough to make it worthwhile. Talk to your bank or credit union to get the conversation rolling. Evaluate your current loan, the current rates, what it would cost you to refi, and how much you'd save if you did. Then you'll know exactly which way to go with your mortgage.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, pilot your submersible toward Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com, as well as DefenseNews.com and C4ISRnet, spoileralert.com. And to be the most up-to-date driver in the motor pool, sign up for our Early Bird Brief newsletter, compiled each morning to bring you the latest headlines. It's also an audio. Check out the podcast version out each weekday wherever you get your podcasts. And if social media is where you get your news, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And stay tuned. Up next, we see some recent exploits from Coast Guard crews on dramatic missions. Don't go away. Welcome back. The Coast Guard is always flying into danger or dropping rescue swimmers into tossing waves in order to help people in need. And recently, Coasties have been on a string of dramatic missions. First up, rescue crews from the Coast Guard Station Cortez in Florida saved 7 people in 2 different cases in just 24 hours. Footage from one of those missions shows a rescue swimmer pulling a person from the hull of a capsized boat before swimming off into open water to rescue a second. All the boaters involved in the 2 accidents near the Cortez Coast Guard Station were pulled safely from the water, and all were wearing life jackets. And in another mission from late May, a helicopter aircrew evacuated a 3-year-old girl from a cruise ship 90 miles offshore when she showed signs of seizure-like symptoms. The crew from the Coast Guard Sector San Diego lowered a crewman from an MH-60 Jayhawk onto the ship to retrieve the girl. The toddler and her mother were hoisted into the helicopter for transport to a hospital. The child was reported to be in stable condition after the incident. And in another story of Coasties at their best, we have this piece from Air Station Kodiak, Alaska, recounting a mission from late 2022 that saw 3 boaters and a dog stranded in dangerous waters after their boat ran aground. Check it out.
So when the call came, we were suiting up, getting ready to go out and do a training mission. So I was already dressed out. We just heard the call and already knew then to switch our job. We could take the same plane we were already going to take.
When the initial call came in, the boat was currently in the middle of the channel, and then throughout the next couple hours, the boat drifted towards the rocks and was very close to making contact with the rocks. They threw their anchor overboard and they were able to drag it until it caught on rocks under the water.
Finally got the confirmation that they were at anchor and they weren't going to abandon ship, and that Sea Tow was coming on scene and was hoping to tow them back.
And as we turned base, they cut the anchor line, and all of a sudden, all mayhem went off.
There was definitely a panic in everyone's voice over the radio.
Identified that there really wasn't a lot of time to act, and we pulled into a hover about as fast as we could safely do, and didn't have time to run the normal SAR checklists and briefs. We bypassed a fair amount of our standard procedures in order to be able to lower our rescue swimmer in the most time-efficient manner possible.
Now, I just had to change really quick, just throw on a different helmet and some gloves, and I was ready, and we were out the door within a minute or 2. Yeah, so after we hoisted the first 2 survivors, when I was heading out the door to get the last guy, the first guy got my attention and told me that he had a dog on the boat and asked if I could get him. And I definitely was kind of paused for a minute because the way we were hoisting everybody with the quick strap doesn't really fit a dog. And so I was like, I'll try my best. And when I got down on the boat, the other guy let me know, he was like, hey, we have a dog in here. And I was like, all right, let me see the dog and let's see if we can do this. And it was a small to medium-sized dog, so I'm like, sure. And so I hooked up the last guy, and then we both just kind of held on to the dog, and we hoisted off and got up the helicopter safely with the last survivor and the dog.
In this circumstance, we were able to recover the third survivor and that dog about 30 seconds before the vessel impacted the rocks and started getting smashed pretty hard into the shoreline. So seconds did matter, and frankly, it speaks to the value of the training that we hold ourselves to and the standards that we have established for us all to follow such that we could react without having time for normal checklists, but still accomplishing what we needed to set up and execute those hoists rapidly and safely.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.